Part 2. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 11. Chapter 11. Every member of the Li family is a treasure. Jiyan is in a good mood now that he is out of the miserable situation of fleeing from famine. She tried her best to act cute with her big eyes and win some goodwill for her family. Tao Hongying looked over from the stove and laughed when she saw her mother-in-law and daughter looking so at ease. Then she went to talk to Manager Wang for a few words, and then returned to the kitchen. She called Jia Huan to help prepare the ingredients for dinner. Zhao Yuru didn't hear clearly what Tao Hongying said to Manager Wang. While washing the vegetables, she came close to her and asked, "Hongying, what did you say to Manager Wang?" Tao Hongying was mixing a sauce. She chuckled when she heard this and said, "I asked Manager Wang where MRS Sun's hometown is." "Why are you asking that? Is MRS Sun a fellow countryman of yours?" Zhao Yuru looked curious. "That's not the case, I just want to make something delicious for Madam." Tao Hongying was stirring the sauce as she spoke, smiling mysteriously. Zhao Yuru simply didn't ask. Anyway, the fourth daughter-in-law's cooking was recognized as delicious, so she had nothing to worry about. "Daughter-in-law, do you see what we caught?" The two sisters-in-law were busy when Li Laosi ran in with a big smile. Tao Hongying looked back and saw Li Laosi holding a fat carp as long as a forearm in his hand. The fish was still alive and vigorously swung its tail in Li Laosi's hand, trying to get out. "Such a big fish, how did you catch it?" Tao Hongying quickly found a basin, filled it with water and put the fish in it. "It's strange to say that just now my mother carried Fu Niu to the deck to get some air. Just after standing there for a while, this big fish landed on the deck with a swish. The deck was slippery, and it flopped for a while before we caught it." Li Laosi was so excited as he spoke and gestured that he couldn't help but repeat it again. "He really jumped up with a swish, which even scared my mother. Fu Niu is quite brave," she kept giggling. "Now that's good, we have another dish for dinner." Tao Hongying was also happy. She wanted to say that her daughter was blessed, but she was afraid that the Sun family would hear. "Okay, you guys are busy, I'm going to work." Li Laosi also knew what he was doing, so he turned around and went out. Tao Hongying asked Li Jiawen to kill the fish, then cleaned it up. She took a slightly narrow knife to break up the fish meat and pick out the spines. "Third sister-in-law, please beat the 2 eggs and mix them well. I will steam an egg custard for you in a moment." Tao Hongying turned around and told Zhao Yuru, her hands were busy. Zhao Yuru responded and hurried to get the eggs. In the cabin, MRS Li was holding good news and chatting with MRS Sun to relieve her boredom. Miss Sun was held in the arms of the nanny and sat next to MRS Li. She looked at the chubby Jiyan with her big dark eyes and said a few words from time to time, as if she was chatting with Jiyan. Jiyan also liked the pink and cute little girl, so he also teased her with babbling. "Look, these two little sisters are talking lively." MRS Sun's attention has been focused on the child. Seeing this scene, she was extremely happy. Old MRS Li also laughed, sighing in her heart that her granddaughter is so smart that she always gets hurt wherever she goes. "Madam, dinner is ready." The maid came in with a food tray. When MRS Li saw it, she took the good news and left with a very eye-catching look. "What are you doing tonight?" MRS Sun teased her daughter with her hands and asked the maid without raising her head. "Back to Madam, it's barbecued pork with honey sauce, fish ball soup and garlic choy sum, and I also made steamed egg custard for the lady." The maids replied cheerfully. They all ate with the master, and whatever was left by the master was theirs. The food today is so good, so naturally they are also in a good mood. Upon hearing this, MRS Sun quickly raised her head to look, with a look of surprise on her face. These 3 dishes were all dishes from her hometown. She quickly asked, "Who cooked today's meal?" The maid thought something had gone wrong and didn't dare to hide it. "Madam, it was cooked by the 4th daughter-in-law of the Li family." The steward thought it was good, so he sent it to Madam for a change. Mrs. Sun didn't say anything after hearing this. She picked up a piece of honey-glazed barbecued pork with her chopsticks and couldn't wait to put it into her mouth. The sweet and salty sauce coated the tough meat slices, and Mrs. Sun squinted her eyes while eating. N.A. Miss Sun's little hand slapped the table as she smelled the fragrance. Mrs. Sun then remembered that Tao Hongying had made a bowl of custard for her daughter, and quickly motioned to the maid to bring the bowl over. The golden custard is served in a white porcelain blue and white bowl, with a few drops of soy sauce sprinkled on the surface. The custard will tremble if you move it lightly, making people move their index fingers. The mother and daughter were extremely satisfied with the meal. The maid looked at the mostly empty dish plate and joked with a smile. The madam and the young lady are lucky, just pick up a few people at the pier and they will all find treasures from now on. The madam and the young lady will no longer have to worry about food. Well, it's true that we were lucky, but the Li family also put their best efforts. Mrs. Sun drank tea and rinsed her mouth, then ordered, give sister-in-law Li 2 taels of silver, and ask her to pay more attention to the meals for me and the young lady from now on. Yes, madam, the maid went on happily. The Li family is also eating at this moment, simple millet porridge, 2-faced pancakes, and the remaining half fish stewed with tofu. The whole family eats deliciously together. Jiyan was lying in her mother's arms, drinking goat's milk. Seeing her mother looking at the door of the cabin from time to time, she was also curious in her heart. Fortunately, soon a maid came to give the reward. The whole family then learned that Tao Hongying got such a job because of her cooking skills. The fourth aunt is so awesome. Hongying's craftsmanship is so good that she can't go wrong wherever she goes. Everyone was rejoicing, but Wu Kuiwa curled her lips and took the opportunity to eat all the fish in the basin. Jiyan was proud of her mother's good deeds and danced with joy. Seeing Wu Kuiwa like this, she glared at her. Unfortunately, her eyelids couldn't control her, and she almost rolled up and couldn't get down. After a while, the Li family became favored by Madam, and Tao Hongying was promoted to Madam and Mrs. Cook. This matter spread throughout the ship. From the top to the stewards, to the servants and maids, they are all very polite to the Li family. Manager Wang also made a special request to change the residence of the Li family. It is no longer a dark and damp basement, but has been replaced by 2 rooms on the second floor with windows, and there are 4 rooms, which are much more spacious. Mrs. Li patted her granddaughter to sleep. Thinking of the big carp that suddenly appeared on the deck and seemed to keep jumping into her granddaughter's arms, she couldn't help but tremble with excitement. Fu Niur, Grandma can't say it, but Grandma knows it. It's all thanks to you that our whole family can survive. As long as Grandma lives for one day, no one in the entire Lao Li family will be allowed to treat you badly. No one is allowed to treat you badly, they are ungrateful white-eyed wolves. Jiyan was drowsy and couldn't open her eyes. She could only grin, which was a response to the old lady's promise. Jiaxi and Jian ran in from outside, shouting loudly. Grandma, let us touch my sister, we will follow the boatman to cast a net at the stern of the boat to catch fish. Old Mrs. Li raised her hand and gave them 2 chestnuts, get out of here, you are naughty at all times, your sister just fell asleep. Jiaxi and Jian ran away with their heads in their hands, and in the blink of an eye they disappeared again. They couldn't see Mrs. Li's smiling face at all. It's great that the whole family is alive. End of this chapter. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 12. Chapter 12, The Little Savior. Her hands patted her little granddaughter more and more gently, and she felt extremely at ease. In a blink of an eye, it had been 7 or 8 days since the Li family had boarded the ship. They each performed their duties, never being lazy or slippery, and the Sun family members treated them with kindness, without any embarrassment or humiliation. Jiyan's mission is to play with Miss Sun every day. The 7-month-old girl couldn't say anything. She just kept babbling along with him. Occasionally spitting a few bubbles of saliva and dancing a little can make Miss Sun very happy and make MRS Sun smile. On this day, MRS Sun looked at the little hat Zhao Yuru had sewn for Jiyan. The pattern was very similar to that in her hometown. She got excited for a moment and put the two children in the inner room with the nanny to take care of them. Then she took old MRS Lee to the outer room to look at the pattern book she had saved. As a result, as soon as MRS Sun left, the wet nurse started to yawn. The hull of the ship was shaking so much last night that she almost didn't sleep all night, and she was really sleepy now. The wet nurse simply put the young lady into the small wooden bed with a fence, and Jiyan would not turn over, so she just let her lie on the bed. Jiyan turned her head and looked at Miss Sun through the gap in the fence. The little girl was lying on the crib, playing with her fingers boredly, and then turned over and sat up. Jiyan was afraid that she would fall, so he made a few noises, trying to get her to lie down again. But when Miss Sun heard the noise, she stood up holding onto the fence. Then, he was attracted by a plate of snacks on the table outside the fence. It is a plate of brown walnut cake, each piece is as big as a child's palm, and it is fragrant and very tempting. Children are very curious, so MS Sun simply forgot about the good news and went to get the walnut cake with her short arms stretched out. At this moment, the wet nurse had fallen asleep leaning on the bed. Jiyan was a little anxious. Before she could think of a way to remind the nanny, Miss Sun had already grabbed a piece of walnut cake and stuffed it directly into her mouth. Woo! The walnuts were crispy and dry, and Miss Sun's little mouth was filled to the brim without spitting out. When I wanted to cry, I sucked some into my trachea, and soon my face turned red from holding it in. Jiyan wanted to jump up and run to save people, but unfortunately she was now a baby who couldn't move freely. She could only cry for help at the top of her lungs, whoa, whoa, whoa. What's the matter, Funiur? Grandma is here, Grandma is here. MRS Lee ran in first. MRS Sun was originally worried that her daughter would be frightened, but she saw that her face turned purple. Nanny, MRS Sun was so frightened that her hands and feet became weak. MRS Lee, however, had experience. She quickly picked up Miss Sun, took the walnut cake out of her mouth, put her on her arm, and patted her the back. Miss Sun's family cried and coughed, and finally spit out the walnut cake. But the wet nurse had woken up early now. She was as frightened as a quail and huddled at the foot of the bed, shivering. MRS Sun hugged her daughter tightly. Listening to her daughter's cry, she finally came to her senses, and all her anger was directed at the nanny. Why are you looking at Miss? The nanny quickly begged for mercy. I didn't mean it, madam. I was really sleepy, so I just wanted to squint for a while, but I didn't expect that Miss would get up to have a snack. You mean to blame the lady? It has nothing to do with you. Son, she asked sternly, her face turned red. If it weren't for her status, she would have hit someone. The wet nurse pressed her forehead against the ground and cried bitterly. No, no, madam, it's all my fault, please spare me this time, I will never have another time. Old MRS Lee felt a little soft-hearted when she saw that she was crying miserably and her eyes were black, so she said tentatively. Madam, I watched sister-in-law Lee take care of the young lady, and she was very careful. I heard that she got angry because she had no milk for the young lady, and a bunch of blisters around her mouth haven't gone away yet. Even now, there are circles under her eyes. It's dark. I must have had a bad sleep at night and was so sleepy that I made such a big mistake. MRS Sun glanced at the nanny, her expression softened slightly. Old MRS Lee gently patted the good news and stopped crying, and her tone became softer. Madam is out of town. She just gets angry for a moment and wants to change someone. I'm afraid it's pointless. Besides, this nanny treats the lady sincerely, and she knows that she has made a big mistake. If you, sir, forgive her this time, I will definitely remember your kindness and take better care of Miss in the future. Wouldn't it be better? The wet nurse was extremely grateful to Mrs. Lee and nodded hurriedly. Mrs. Sun also thought this was reasonable. She saw that her daughter had already pulled the string of pearls hanging on her lapel and played with it. It was obvious that there was nothing serious. She said, "Well, luckily Fu Niuer was by her side today, so nothing happened to my daughter. It's also God's blessing. Otherwise, you can't make up for your mistake with 100 lives." Hearing this, the nanny just breathed a sigh of relief when she heard Mrs. Sun say again, "But we can't just let it go. I'll deduct this month's money so that you can remember it for a long time." "Yes, yes, thank you madam for your forgiveness. I will do my best to take care of you in the future and will never make the same mistake as today again." The wet nurse almost killed the young lady. If she didn't resell her or beat her half to death, it was the master's mercy. Not to mention deducting 1 month's monthly silver, she would happily accept a few more months. Get up. Mrs. Sun still felt a little angry, and stopped looking at her after saying this. The nanny stood up quickly, and then secretly gave Mrs. Lee a grateful look. "Aunt Lee, I really want to thank Fu Niuer today. Without her, Nanan might have suffered a lot." Mrs. Sun saw the obedient and quiet Jiyan in old Mrs. Lee's arms, with deep gratitude in her eyes. Mrs. Lee quickly waved her hand. "Madam, you are serious. Children often cry, and it is just a coincidence. We ladies are lucky, and we can turn any danger into safety." Mrs. Sun was happy to hear this and ordered the maid in a loud voice, "Open the box, take out the pieces of fine brocade I brought from my house, and make some good dresses for Fu Niuer." Upon hearing this, Mrs. Lee quickly waved her hand. "Madam, you can't do it, you can't do it. How can we, children from a poor family, use silk and satin to make clothes?" Mrs. Sun paused for a moment and came back to her senses. She only wanted to give Fu Niuer some good things, but she didn't think about whether they were what she needed. "But if you don't give me silk, what else can I give?" Mrs. Sun is in trouble. Looking at the baby's chubby hands exposed to the good news, the wet nurse had an idea in her mind and suggested in a low voice, "Madam, Mrs. Lee and her family cannot wear brocade, and it is troublesome to sew clothes. Why not find some old clothes made of fine cloth, which can be worn immediately without being eye-catching? Yesterday, my servant saw that sister-in-law Lee's cuffs were all patched." These words reminded Mrs. Sun, and she immediately nodded in praise. "Yes, that's a good idea. Go and ask Shunner to find more old clothes in the box." Mrs. Lee still wanted to refuse, but Jiyan stretched out her little hand and tugged on her skirt. "Hey!" Mrs. Lee thought her granddaughter was hungry or needed to pee. As she lowered her head to check, the wet nurse went out. Mrs. Sun also took out a silver note and 2 ingots of silver from a small box on the side of the bed. "Auntie, it's always good for your family to have more money with you when you go to live with your relatives. You should hide these 100 taels of silver notes and use them as money for me to add to Niuer's future marriage." After saying that, she pushed the silver ingot over again and said, "You put these 10 taels outside and keep them for occasional use." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 13. Chapter 13. The plaster sticks on. Mrs. Sun hugged her daughter, whose complexion had returned to rosy. She sincerely thanked Mrs. Lee and Jiyan, but she also planned carefully for them. Even before Mrs. Lee could refuse, she stuffed the banknotes into her arms, leaving only 10 taels of silver outside. At this moment, the maidservant also came in with a basin, ready to wash Miss Sun. Old Mrs. Lee hesitated for a moment, and could only hold Jiyan in her arms, bow deeply, and then retreated. The nurse and the maid moved very quickly. Not long after Mrs. Lee returned to the room with the good news in her arms, they sent 3 large bags of clothes. Half of them are Miss Sun's old clothes. They are said to be old clothes, but in fact they have only been worn once or twice, and they are no different from new ones. The needlework is good and the material is soft. Mrs. Lee looked at it over and over again with joy. The remaining half is very messy, including women's clothes, men's clothes, and even half-grown children's clothes, all of which were begged by the wet nurse and the maids, wives, and servants of the Sun family. Everyone heard that the Lee family had just rescued their master, and even to show their loyalty, they enthusiastically donated them and collected a large bag full of them. "Oh, mother, I actually have so many clothes and 10 taels of silver." Wu Kuiwa was holding a blue top with white flowers and comparing it happily on her body. As she spoke, her eyes furtively glanced at the 10 taels of silver in Mrs. Lee's hand. Tao Hongying and the others were not as unruly as Wu Kuiwa. They looked at the clothes and money without touching them and waited for Mrs. Lee to speak. Old Mrs. Lee took 2 puffs from her pipe and then told everyone about Ji Yin's rescue of Miss Sun. "Oh, then our Fu Niu has become the savior of Miss Sun's family." Wu Kuiwa's face was filled with joy when she heard the good news, and her eyes looked at the good news as if she were looking at a treasure. Ji Yin didn't like Wu Kuiwa's sudden turn of events, so she rolled her eyes and buried her head in Tao Hongying's arms. "Okay, Mrs. Sun is still the savior of our family. Just forget about it and don't go outside." Old Mrs. Lee saw that Wu Kuiwa was a little too excited, so she quickly put away the money and gave her a few harsh words. Wu Kuiwa was a little unconvinced, but she was not ambiguous at all when choosing clothes. She pulled several pieces into her arms. The big boat went south along the river and soon arrived at Minanling Pier. Minan Ridge is on the dividing line between north and south. Once here, the journey is already halfway over. The victims walked slowly and were blocked by state capitals along the way. Before they could escape here, the pier was not that messy. Seeing that it was getting closer to Kyoto, the people on the boat became more relaxed and happy. "Yashen, would you like to go to the shore with me, look for fresh vegetables and dry goods? Let's fill up the storehouse." Steward Wang called Li Lao and planned to get off the boat to buy. Li Lao raised his voice and responded, but before getting off the boat, he was pulled back by Wu Kuiwa. "I want to go too. I'm going to die of suffocation after staying on this boat for so long." Wu Kuiwa kept complaining, and Li Lao was tired of hearing it. But Manager Wang was still waiting, and it was not good to be delayed for too long, so he said nothing more and silently allowed Wu Kuiwa to follow. Steward Wang also brought 2 boys with him, but he said nothing when he saw this. A few people got ashore, and Manager Wang ran directly to the vegetable stall on the roadside. Wu Kuiwa's eyes couldn't help but glance around. When she saw something she was interested in, she had to stop and touch it. She landed at the back of the crowd. There were a few beggars on the roadside with unkempt hair and dirty faces, whining and begging. Their tattered clothes exuded a smell that made people unable to avoid them. A man in rich clothes and with a big belly swaggered by on the road. When the beggars saw it, they hurriedly came forward holding dirty and broken bowls. "Sir, please do me a favor and give me something to eat." "Get out of here." The man had a sinister face, and he had a bad temper. In addition, the smell of the beggar was off-putting, so he raised his leg and kicked him. The beggar was already very hungry. He couldn't resist it. He howled and rolled several times on the ground. He happened to roll to Wu Kuiwa's feet. She was so disgusted that she was about to curse a few words, but the beggar blocked her way. "Sister, big sister, woohoo, big sister, it's me, I'm Urguza." The beggar hugged Wu Kuiwa's calf and cried harder and harder. Wu Kuiwa subconsciously lowered her head and looked carefully, gasping in surprise. "Urguza, why are you here? Didn't you and Dad leave long ago?" She didn't mind the smell anymore, so she squatted down and picked up the beggar. Li Lao heard the noise and hurried back. When he saw who the beggar was, he frowned. Wu Kuiwa is the eldest in the family, and she has a younger brother named Wu Ergu. When he grew up, he didn't want people to call him a big name, so he always called himself Wu Er when he met people. There was just such a boy in the Wu family. The whole family pampered him and developed his lazy and selfish character. Even though the Wu family's wife died a few years ago, Wu Ergu didn't change his temper. When the famine broke out earlier, everyone dragged their families to flee south. Wu Kuiwa's father took Wu Er and the family's money and food and ran away without even thinking that there was a daughter like Wu Kuiwa. But Wu Kuiwa was thinking about it all day long. When she first escaped, she saw Tian'er whispering in Li Lao's ears that she wanted to find her father and younger brother. Li Lao knew what Wu Er and his father were like, so he ignored Wu Kuiwa at all, not wanting to meet them here. Wu Kuiwa was hugging her brother and crying, holding his arm and asking questions repeatedly. "Where's Dad? Isn't Dad with you?" Wu Er brushed aside the messy hair that obscured his eyes and quickly looked at Wu Kuiwa. I saw that she was wearing a neat dress, with no patches on her body, and her face was fair and white. It seemed that she was living a good life. He held his stomach with a look of grief on his face. 3 days. The biological father who gave birth to and raised him was beaten to death, but he mentioned it as if he was talking about an unrelated person, which was really cold-hearted. Wu Kuiwa cried hard when she heard that her father was dead. "Then have you buried Dad? Have you erected a monument? I want to find him back later and take Dad to his ancestral grave." Wu Er was a little impatient. "The person is dead, why bury him? I can't even eat, how can I find the energy to erect a monument for him?" "You are really, let's go, I will take you to the boat." Wu Kuiwa heard her brother say this, although she was sad, but there was nothing she could do, so she pulled him and walked to the boat. Li Lao wanted to stop him, but he couldn't stop him, so he could only talk to Manager Wang and chase him. On the deck of the big ship, Mrs. Li was holding good news and standing by the guardrail watching the people coming and going on the pier. Ji Yin's little mouth was slightly open, her big eyes were unblinking, and she looked seriously. This world is so unfamiliar to her. The Tianwu dynasty did not exist in any period of history, but the productivity was still low and the people were poor. Most of the people coming and going on the pier were wearing patched clothes and had sallow complexions and thin skin. It was obvious that they were not having a good life. Mrs. Li looked at her granddaughter's face with a hint of seriousness and compassion, and thought she had made a mistake. After all, how could a child who is not yet 1 month old look like this? End of this chapter. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 14. Chapter 14. Who doesn't have a few troublesome relatives? She quickly pointed to the 2 puppies on the pier, teasing her granddaughter with a smile. "Fu Niuer, when we settle down and have a home, Grandma will also raise a puppy for you, okay?" Ji Yin stopped thinking and quickly changed her face to a smiling face, babbling and babbling to make her grandma happy. She was so affectionate that Mrs. Li drooled all over her face. Mrs. Li was so amused by her that when her grandfather and grandson were playing around, Wu Kuiwa pulled Wu Er and ran onto the boat crying. "Mom! Do you see who I found?" Wu Kuiwa pushed Wu Er to Mrs. Li. Old Mrs. Li had good eyesight and recognized Wu Er at a glance, and the smile on her face suddenly disappeared. "Mom, it's me, Wu Er, woohoo, I've found my relative." Wu Er pretended to wipe his tears, but secretly looked at Mrs. Li. Seeing that she was also cleanly dressed and holding a fat, white baby in her arms, he became more and more convinced that the Li family had made a fortune, and he would rely on the Li family no matter what. "What a coincidence, I met you here." Mrs. Li's tone was cold. She had been an in-law for more than 10 years and she didn't have any good impressions of the Wu family. Wu Kuiwa was not stupid. Seeing her mother-in-law acting like this, she knew that her brother would not welcome her, so she just went out of her way, knelt down and hugged the old lady's legs. "Mom, my father has been beaten to death by bandits who robbed food. My brother was begging for food at the dock and was kicked to death just now. Oh, mother, please keep my brother, this is the only relative I have left." Jiyan was nestled in the crook of Mrs. Li's neck. She turned to look at Wu Er and lay down in disgust. She knew intuitively that this was definitely not a fuel-efficient lamp, and it would be a disaster if it was left behind. But she couldn't speak, so she could only chirp to vent her displeasure. The relative died, old Mrs. Li frowned. After all, she was a member of the same generation. When she heard the news of the death, she felt somewhat uncomfortable. Wu Kuiwa nodded, crying until she had runny nose and tears. "Mom, let's take my brother with us. The Sun family's ship is so big that he is not missing." "What nonsense are you talking about? If a ship is big, it must carry more people. There are so many ships on the pier. Do you think any of them are taking the victims on board?" Old Mrs. Li didn't like Wu Kuiwa's natural tone, so she scolded her severely. "Mom, our old Wu family is such a weakling, you can't just die without saving it. Go help me and plead with Mrs. Sun. Didn't our Funi Wu just save Miss Sun's family?" "Shut up." Mrs. Li became even more angry when she saw that Wu Kuiwa was becoming more and more outspoken and even wanted to repay her kindness. Wu Kuiwa didn't care about this, and shouted louder and louder, attracting several boatmen to watch, and Mrs. Li's face became even more angry. Fortunately, Li Lao chased her back and covered Wu Kuiwa's mouth. "Mom, making such a fuss is not an option. It's better to help and beg for mercy. In the worst case, they will be kicked out when we get to Kyoto." When her son spoke, Mrs. Li couldn't ignore it. Besides, without Wu Er, Wu Kuiwa could really make a scene and everyone in the dock would come to see the joke. "Let him go down first and wait at the shore while I go and ask." Old Mrs. Li had a dark face, hugged the good news and went to see Mrs. Sun. Mrs. Sun happened to have nothing to do, so she didn't refuse after hearing Mrs. Li explain the whole story. "Everyone's family has troubles, so I can take one more person with me if I want, just don't cause any trouble on the ship." "Don't worry, madam, I will ask my family to keep an eye on him at all times and not allow him to leave the cabin. If he behaves a little bit, I will throw him into the river without madam saying anything," Mrs. Li said firmly, which made Mrs. Sun laugh. "It doesn't have to be like this. It's like chasing people away at the dock. Madam, if you are kind-hearted, you will definitely be rewarded with good things." After chatting for a while, Mrs. Li put down the good news, coaxed Miss Sun to play, and then hurried to deal with Wu Er. Li Laosi carried a few buckets of water, Wu Kuiwa helped Wu Er wash up and change into a set of clean clothes, and Tao Hongying helped cook a large bowl of porridge. Wu Er had eaten and drank enough, and as expected he was going to wander around on the boat. As a result, he was locked directly in the cabin and was not allowed to take a step out. Orange Mrs. Li teased Wu Kuiwa so that the two siblings could hear clearly. "We have a few days to go to Kyoto. If Wu Er dares to cause trouble and embarrass our family, I will directly ask the fourth child to throw you two siblings into the river. If you have the guts, try it." She glared at Wu Kuiwa fiercely, "Rather than letting you be embarrassed and cause trouble, which will cause our Li family to be kicked off the boat, it is better to drown you two troublemakers first." Wu Kuiwa shrank her neck in fear, and Wu Er finally calmed down. In just an hour, the Sun family's ship set sail again. 2 or 3 days passed in a flash, and Wu Er was occasionally allowed to walk on the deck by virtue of his convenience. He was jealous, seeing the wealth of the Sun family, and wanted to think of some bad ideas. But Mrs. Li made arrangements for her family to be happy and in peace, and she followed him all the time. He has bad intentions and has no chance. In this way, it was a smooth journey. As everyone was looking forward to it day and night, the big ship finally arrived in Kyoto. Kyoto Pier is larger than any other pier we have docked before. There is no war or disaster victims here. Although the people coming and going are not in fine clothes, their living standards are obviously much better than those at Manonling Pier. Ji-Yun was hugged by Mrs. Lee, and when she came out of the cabin, she looked up and saw such a prosperous scene. But she was not as excited as the Lee family, and instead sighed secretly. Such prosperity probably only exists in Kyoto. In a land of famine and war, there are people dying of hunger and mourning everywhere, but under the feet of the rulers, there is peace and prosperity. Isn't this, in another sense, a wealthy family that smells of wine and meat, and is frozen to death on the road? Funiur, we've arrived in Kyoto. Mrs. Lee was very excited and hugged her little granddaughter. We don't have to be afraid of barbarians anymore. Zhao Yuru and Tao Hongying also had red eyes and reached out to touch Ji-Yun's little face. We Funiur are lucky we don't have to worry about anything when we live here in Kyoto from now on. Ji-Yun spat out a spit bubble in response, which made the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law laugh again. Mom, everything is packed. Go and tell Mrs. son that we should get off the boat quickly. Li Lao-er and his two brothers came to Mrs. Lee carrying large and small packages. Old Mrs. Lee responded, hugged the good news and went to Mrs. son's room. Mrs. son was feeding her daughter milk when she saw Mrs. Lee coming in and asked her to sit down. Madam, I really appreciate your care during these days. Now that we have arrived in Kyoto, it is no longer convenient for our whole family to disturb us. The ship will dock soon and we will leave. Mrs. Lee was very grateful and thanked her sincerely. Mrs. son was a little reluctant and asked subconsciously, are you leaving now? Turning around, she took old Mrs. Lee's hand, sincerely trying to keep her. Aunt Lee, your family escaped from famine and came to Kyoto with no one to rely on. Why don't you stay with our son family? I can't say that I will protect you all your life, but at least you can have enough food and clothing. Mrs. son said it straightforwardly and with good intentions. But Mrs. Lee immediately shook her head, because if they stayed in the Sun family, they could only be slaves and be inferior to others for the rest of their lives. In the future, children and grandchildren will be affected in their studies and scientific examinations. End of this chapter. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 15. Chapter 15. The bumpkin enters the city. Madam is willing to take us in because she thinks highly of our Lee family, but Madam doesn't know something. My eldest son has already passed the exam and is a scholar now. He is studying abroad, and we are also going to join him. We will live up to Madam's kindness. After hearing this, Mrs. son also felt that she had taken it for granted. Boss Lee is a scholar, and the Lee family is a scholarly family. How can she be a slave? This is simply humiliating. She quickly asked the maid to take 20 taels of silver and give it to Mrs. Lee. She also wrote down the address of the Sun family. He warned that if the Lee family is in trouble, they can go there and seek refuge. Mrs. Lee couldn't refuse, so she had to accept. She was extremely grateful to Mrs. son. Remembering that the Sun family would have to sail for another 7 or 8 days, they left the dairy goat behind. Mrs. son was very happy because although the wet nurse had recovered somewhat, the milk was still not enough for the child. Mrs. Lee hugged her granddaughter and walked out. She felt guilty for giving away her food rations. But when he looked down at his granddaughter, she was scratching her little hands, as if saying goodbye to Miss Sun. She couldn't help laughing again, lowered her head and kissed her granddaughter. My Funiur is such a good child, Grandma. I will love you for the rest of my life. No, the entire Lee family will love you. Without you, the family would not be so stable. Ji-Yun nestled in her grandma's arms, babbling twice, and finally took a look at the little beauty from the Sun family. Little guy, See you again by fate. The Li family took advantage of this moment to say goodbye to Manager Wang and the familiar maids, wives, and servants. Soon, the big ship docked at the pier, and the Li family got off the ship one after another. After walking far away, the Li family, who had been silent, finally came to their senses. Are we really in Kyoto? Is this Kyoto? Fortunately we can take a boat, otherwise we wouldn't be able to reach it even if we walk for a month. We are stepping on the ground, why do we still feel swaying? Li Lauer had the best idea, so he walked close to my mother and asked, Mom, this is still 200 to 300 miles away from my uncle's home. Should we find a carriage or caravan to accompany us on the journey? Jiyan was looking around with her big eyes open at the moment. She had never seen the bustling streets of ancient times since she traveled through time, and she was really curious. Falling into the eyes of Mrs. Li, she hurriedly said. Even if we hire a car or find a caravan to accompany us, we can't set off immediately. We'd better find a place to stay first and let our lucky girl watch the excitement. Li Lauer was also amused by the curious look on his little niece's face. The child, who was just 1 month old, was fair, fat, clean, and had a rich expression. He looked very happy no matter how he looked at it. He raised his hand and touched his little niece's face, imitating the behavior of his nephews. I'm also blessed with Fu Niuer's fortune, and I'm going to find a good place to live. The Li family walked all the way and soon left the pier and arrived at a nearby shopping street. This place is less crowded and more prosperous than the dock. Everyone was walking on the long street paved with blue stones, lined with rows of shops on both sides. The structure is made of blue bricks and wood carvings, with white walls and black tiles. The windows and door lintels are also engraved with exquisite patterns. There are countless small stalls at the entrance of the store, with a wide range of things on display and all kinds of eating utensils. The faces of the Li family were full of exclamation, and the few young men couldn't help but be excited, looking around and around. If it weren't for their parents dragging them away, they would have gone somewhere long ago. Jiyan also tried her best to support her neck and twisted her little head to look around. Her eyes were full of antiques, which made her constantly admire the wisdom of the working people. Yet, Jiyan became more and more happy as she read it, and accidentally pulled her grandma's hair. Mrs. Li directly put the swaddling clothes up and held the back of her granddaughter's head with one hand. Jiyan was finally able to see the world from a normal perspective, was in a better mood, and even laughed out loud. Look how happy our lucky girl is. Old Mrs. Li was not tired and held her granddaughter on her shoulders. Tao Hongying also laughed, and just as she was about to speak, Wu Kuiwa suddenly started shouting. Lao Er, have you seen Er Guzi? He was by my side just now, but he disappeared in the blink of an eye. Help me find him. Li Lauer didn't like Wu Ergu at all, so he didn't worry when he heard that he was missing. He is a big living person, how can he be lost? He must be wandering around, just find him. Wu Kuiwa was worried. Seeing that Li Lauer didn't want to help her find it, she simply sat on the ground and cried. I don't want to live anymore. My only brother is lost and you don't even help me. You are too cruel. When she acted like this, all the eyes of passers-by were focused on her, which made the Li family very embarrassed. Li Lauer hurriedly pulled Wu Kuiwa up from the ground. Wu Kuiwa did not dare to make a fuss too ugly, so she looked at Mrs. Li with sobs. Old Mrs. Li's face was so cold that she regretted sticking to Wu Ergu's candy. But it was impossible to ignore it at the moment, so I could only tell my sons, go and look around, be careful, don't get into trouble. Li Lauer gave Wu Kuiwa a hard scare and gritted his teeth with hatred, but in the end he persuaded his brothers and went out. Li Jiaran also disliked his mother and uncle, but he couldn't say anything. He found a shade tree on the roadside and persuaded his grandma, hold Fu Niuer and sit for a while. Jiyan liked the stability of this elder brother, so she smiled at him and waved her hand as if to cheer him up. With the top-notch old lady on the table, This brother may be in trouble in the future. Li Jiaran didn't know if he understood his sister's kindness. He smiled and squeezed her little hand, and finally stood behind his grandma to block the harsh sun. After half an hour, everyone was a little worried, and Li Laosi finally came back holding Wu Ergu by his collar with a gloomy look on his face. Wu Er looked very angry, but he was also afraid of Li Laosi's fist, so he could only shrink his head and pretend to be pitiful. Needless to say, everyone guessed that he had done nothing good. Fourth brother, don't hold him like that, it hurts your neck. Wu Kuiwa followed eagerly, reaching out to save her brother from Li Laosi's hands, but Li Laosi gave him a cold look and became a little scared. Li Laosi threw Wu Ergu to the ground and said, "My second brother and I captured him from the gambling den. I don't know where this kid got the courage to gamble. If we go a little later, he will have to borrow money from the casino. He has nothing in his hands. As long as he loses, our family will have to wipe his ass." The more Li Laosi thought about it, the angrier he became, and he kicked Wu Ergu again. Their family was kind-hearted and took him in to escape from the Northland together. This kid is not grateful at all, and he has no brains to trick people. When Mrs. Li heard this, she looked at Wu Er with disgust. "Wu Ergu, do you think that because your sister married into our family deserves to protect you from disaster? I thought you were pitiful before and couldn't bear your death. Now that you've arrived in Kyoto, get out of here, as our family won't keep you." Wu Ergu didn't have any money on him and was afraid he would starve to death if he left the Li family. He hurriedly crawled to Mrs. Li's feet. "Mom, I was wrong. I just felt a little itchy when I saw the casino. I don't dare to do it anymore. Please don't leave me." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 16. Chapter 16, Don't look at me as a young person, but I have a lot to worry about. Wu Kuiwa also quickly begged for mercy. "Mom, I will watch him and tie his hands. If he dares to make a mistake again, I will beat him. Mom, he is the only one left in our old Wu family. Mom, don't abandon him." Having said that, she did not dare to ask Li Lao to plead for mercy, so she went to ask her two sons. Jiaran Ji couldn't bear to see my mother like this, and she really hated her uncle. She was very embarrassed to be caught in the middle. She kept her head down and her face turned red. Of course Mrs. Li was reluctant to leave her grandson, so she could only hug the good news and turn away. Everyone quickly picked up their luggage and followed closely. Wu Kuiwa was a rare smart person, so she dragged her brother and staggered after her. With Wu Ergu causing such trouble, the Li family did not dare to stay here for fear of causing another trouble. Mrs. Li called for the second and fourth sons, but she was looking for someone to ask about the caravan heading west to Junyang County. Li Lao is good at talking and Li Laosi has the power to defend himself. The brothers entered the tea house first, then went to a large yard filled with carriages and horses, and finally ran back with joy on their faces. "Mom, I found it. There is a team from Junyang County. We agreed to give our family 10 taels of silver and take them on the road. We can also stay with them in Datongpu tonight and set off tomorrow morning. But we have to prepare water on the road ourselves. Seriously, it's going so smoothly, but I'm not afraid that the road will be uneven." Mrs. Li happily kissed her sleeping granddaughter several times and said with a smile, "With Fu Niu in our family, everything goes smoothly." Wu Kuiwa, who was hiding behind the crowd, pouted secretly. She was just a kid who couldn't even speak. Any good thing that comes to her will be given to her, and she won't be afraid of losing her life. Everyone in the Li family ignored her mutterings and quickly packed up their things and entered the courtyard. Old Mrs. Lee is a good person, so she divided a box of snacks given by Mrs. Sun and asked Mr. Lee to give them to the head of the team. He is a middle-aged man with a strong build and a deep voice. As expected, he became much more polite after accepting the snack box, and went up to chat with the family. "You can just call me Laulu. Our agency is in the county town. Therefore, it is fate that we can go all the way to the end. Brother, that's great. I'm going to cause you trouble in the next few days." Mrs. Lee was also polite and pointed at her children and grandchildren with a smile. "We are just ordinary people who come to visit relatives, but the boy in the family is hard-working, and the daughter-in-law can also cook if there is any work along the way. Eldest brother, just give me a shout." Lubayatu was also happy to hear this. He was worried about being disobedient when accompanying him on the road. After all, we are a unit, and any problem would delay the trip. "Okay, old sister, I won't be polite when you have some work to do." His eyes were also sharp, and he was even more reassured when he saw that the Lee family was clean and their expressions were peaceful. They really didn't look like evil people. Old Mrs. Lee has a banknote given by Mrs. Sun, and her family had some financial resources before fleeing the famine. But when you arrive in Juniang County, you have to rebuy your property, so it's not good to just waste it here. So, the family only bought 32 faced steamed buns, a few cabbage and radishes, and added some millet and japonica rice. But I bought 20 extra eggs for Tao Hongying and boiled them for her to eat on the way so that she could replenish her body. It would be better if she had more milk. After all, there are no more dairy goats, so Jiyan relies entirely on his mother for food. At night, Jiyan was hugged by Tao Hongying and slept in Datong Puo. There was only a coarse cloth curtain on the other side, and on the other side were the bodyguards, the second brother Li Lao and Jiren. Jiyan slept a lot during the day, and it was even harder to sleep listening to the sound of the mountain snoring. She could only hold her fingers in her mouth, wandering in space with her mind, feeding chickens, pigs, sheep. The lamb didn't know that its mother had been given away and was bleeding everywhere. Fortunately, it was able to eat grass. A cabbage can also make it swing its short tail and be extremely happy. In her previous life, Jiyan was a homebody. She left the city and wanted to escape the world when she returned to her hometown. So, there are a lot of things at home and outside the house. No big deal, I wish I didn't go out once a month. Looking at it now, she was very happy. Among other things, I have 300 kilograms of vacuum-packed japonica rice, 5 or 6 bags of white flour, and a lot of millet, cornmeal, and other miscellaneous grains. There are only 2 freezers, one filled with meat and seafood, including beef, mutton, pork, ribs, large ribs, prawns, etc. The other one contains frozen pasta, various instant fried foods, ice cream, etc. Not to mention the various vegetables in the backyard and the pigs, sheep, chickens, and ducks raised. There are dozens of live fish in the pond in the corner of the courtyard, including carp, grass carp and all 3 scales. However, these things may sound like a lot, but they may not be enough to help the Lee family. After all, there are more than a dozen of us, especially the older brothers. Each of them is a big eater, half grown up, and will eat me to death. But something is better than nothing. After settling down, plan how to help your family get rich. At least you will have enough food and clothing. Jiyan doesn't want to spend his childhood in cold and hunger all over again. Her little head was under pressure that should not be endured at this age, and she fell asleep quickly. Early on the next morning, the team set off under the morning light. Jiyan was still held in old Mrs. Lee's arms and sat on the shaft of a carriage. Mrs. Lee was afraid that she would be blown by the morning wind, so she carefully pulled her clothes to cover her. The escorts were all curious. The Lee family let their grandchildren walk downstairs, but they were so protective of their granddaughter. In fact, the boys of the Li family were not a little bit unfair. Instead, they picked wildflowers to tease their sister, and asked their grandma if she was thirsty. Bouncer Lu had a bold temper. Seeing that Li Laozi was strong and honest, he liked him very much and took him around to chat with him. Lu Biatu is a good archer. He found out that Li Laozi also had a longbow, so he naturally wanted to say a few more words. Soon he and Li Laozi became brothers and made an appointment to have a chat. The journey lasted until dusk, when they stopped and set up camp. Li Laozi and Lu Biatu went into the woods and came back soon, bringing with them 2 pheasants and a hare. "Brother, your archery skills are so good, you can hit the target with every shot, and you are so powerful. Do you want to follow us and stay out for a few more years? Brother, I will retire. You can definitely be the leader of the escort." Lu Biatu liked Li Laozi very much, he praised him all the time, and he really cherished his talent. Li Laozi was also moved, but the family had not settled down, and it was difficult for him to agree, so he said, "The chief has received a reward, and we are going to join our relatives in Junyang County after we have settled down and have nothing to do at home. I may really go to the chief to beg for food." Lu Biao did not hesitate and asked someone to roast rabbit and pheasant. Tao Hongying carried her daughter on her back to cook as usual. Ji Yan secretly added ingredients to the millet pot and fed the Li family again. Actually, there is not much space left for millet, and she would rather add more rice, but with the team nearby, it is better to be cautious. Li Laozi bought a rattle for his daughter at the pier yesterday. Now he is teasing his daughter with a bright smile with white teeth. He is not as brave and cold as he was when he was killed by arrows in the mountains and forests just now. End of this chapter. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 17. Chapter 17. The Ungrateful White-Eyed Wolf. The journey of 200 miles is neither close nor far. The Li family followed the team for 6 or 7 days and finally arrived in Junyang County one afternoon. When they parted, Lu Biatu insisted on not wanting the 10 taels of silver. He kept saying that he wanted to form a good relationship with the Li family and move around more often in the future. He hopes that Li Laozi will join the agency in the future and run business together. The Li family had no choice but to accept the money, hoping to return the favor if they had the opportunity in the future. Hired 2 carriages and the family arrived at the small mountain village where Uncle Lu Jenner lived before sunset. The small village is very quiet. No one's chimney is smoking now, and there are even fewer lights. Old Mrs. Li thought about what her brother had said when she wrote a letter before, and found the door of the second house at the entrance of the village. This family is surrounded by adobe walls and a courtyard wall, and the roof is covered with a layer of thatch. The courtyard gate is only made of branches, and the house only has 2 or 3 rooms. It looks very poor and dilapidated. When Mrs. Li saw her, she felt worried. She slapped the courtyard door and shouted, "Lu Jenner, come open the door. I'm your sister." But no one responded for a while. Tao Hongying and the others looked at each other with a bit of worry in their expressions. "Here he comes, who is it? No one is allowed to sleep at night." Finally, the door of the room was pushed open with a creaking sound, and a skinny woman with her hair tied back casually came out. Seeing so many people standing at the door, the woman's originally dissatisfied expression immediately froze. She took a few steps back with a look of caution on her face. "Who are you looking for?" "I am Lu Jenner's sister. She married outside the Great Wall in her early years. There was a war in our family some time ago, so I brought my family to join us." Old Mrs. Li responded and spoke carefully. Hearing the words, the woman thought about it for a while before she understood it, and said quickly, "You guys wait a moment." After saying that, she turned around and entered the house, and soon helped an old lady out. Mrs. Li recognized that this was Lu Jenner's daughter-in-law, her sister-in-law Guo. Mr. Guo is several years younger than Mrs. Li, but now she looks extremely old. His face was wrinkled like dried orange peel, and his body didn't look very strong. Mrs. Guo walked to the door of the courtyard and then raised her triangular eyes to look at old Mrs. Li, who was standing in front of her. "It's my old sister. Why did you come all the way to my house? Come in and talk." Mrs. Chao recognized Mrs. Li, but her tone was rather cold, not at all eager to see a long-lost relative. Old Mrs. Li was full of enthusiasm, but suddenly she felt a little cold. She thought for a while and took her children and grandchildren into the yard. At this moment, 2 men and a fat woman came out of the room. They seemed to have just gotten out of bed, rubbing their eyes and yawning, looking at the Li family with curious and bored eyes. "Brothers and sisters, why don't you see Lu Zhen'er?" When Ms. Guo heard Mrs. Li mentioning her husband, her face was a little complicated. "Lu Zhen'er died last year." "What? How did you die?" Old Mrs. Li swayed and almost fell down. Fortunately, Mr. Li stepped forward to help her. "Didn't I send a letter the year before last saying that I was in good health? How come?" When she heard that her younger brother had passed away unexpectedly, Mrs. Li was completely stunned. She held back her tears and wanted to ask for more information. Ms. Guo snorted coldly. She was not at all sad, but seemed to be extremely resentful. "Last summer there was a heavy rain, and the embankment was filled with water. It couldn't reach us. Lu Zhen'er, the man who had been stabbed 1,000 times, had to save a child who was washed away by the water. As a result, he got caught in it and left us behind. Orphans and widows suffer in the world." As she spoke, she looked at old Mrs. Li again. The mean eyes were like a scraper, scraping Mrs. Li and other members of the Li family up and down. Mrs. Li acted cautiously. Before disembarking, she asked her family to change out of the clothes Mrs. Sun had given her and put on the previously patched clothes. Coupled with the dusty road, their clothes were dirty and they looked very embarrassed now. "So," Tao's eyes were full of disgust and disappointment. "My father is dead. Why do you come here to seek refuge? With our family like this, how can we take you in? We can't live our own lives." Lu Zhen'er's eldest son Lu Taizu was very sleepy. Seeing that the Li family didn't look like a wealthy family, he kicked him out. Mrs. Guo didn't say a word after hearing her son's words, obviously agreeing with them. "We just want to have a place to stay temporarily. We don't need you for food, clothing, or anything like that." Li Laoer was dissatisfied with their attitude and stood up to explain. But before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by another man. "Who are you kidding? What if you, poor fellows, really live in my house and refuse to leave?" The second son of the Lu family, Lu Lefu, was also dissatisfied, curling his lips and staring. But Mrs. Guo finally looked at the face of the dead Lu Zhen'er, waved her hand to stop her son, and said, Okay, if you don't have a place to live, you can live in our yard first, but don't even think about entering the house. Leave as soon as dawn tomorrow, our family can't help you." Mrs. Li was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Jiyan was heartbroken. She tried her best to endure it and didn't move the rocks out of the space and throw them on the Lu family's house. Selfish and ungrateful. With such a family, she would rather let the Li family sleep on the street than have anything to do with them. She stretched out her little hand and gave her grandma a squeeze, making 2 bleeding sounds. Lu Lefu stood very close. When he heard the movement, he stretched his head and took a look, which made him even more disgusted. The poor are all fleeing, and they still have so many babies. Li Laosi was furious when he heard this and wanted to arrest Lu Lefu. Lu Lefu was also slippery and was so frightened that he quickly hid behind Guo. "What's going on? If I don't take you in, you're going to beat them up. Come on, beat them. If you have the ability, beat our whole family to death and take over our house." Old Mrs. Li, who had been silent all this time, raised her hand and held her son's hand, Fourth, don't make trouble. After saying that, she turned to Mrsquo and said, brother and sister, it's my fault for not thinking carefully. Don't worry, if Lugena is gone, our two families will no longer be related. Even if we starve to death, we won't bother you. Msquo snorted coldly, that's fine. You can't go back on what you said. After saying that, she took her son and daughter-in-law back to the house. There was silence in the yard. Mom, how could they do this? A few years ago, my uncle sent a message that he wanted to marry his son, but the family couldn't afford the dowry gift. You even sold your own dowry jewelry. Our family was hungry for more than half a year, so we collected money for them. Come. Li Lauer was so angry that he gasped, but now, they have turned against each other just because their uncle passed away. Tao Hongying, Zhao Yuru, and others were also full of disappointment and indignation. Only Wu Ergo stood behind everyone and watched the excitement indifferently. Old Mrs. Li sighed longly, held her granddaughter upright in her arms, and pressed her soft and warm face against her, until the chill in her heart finally dissipated. Fu Niuer, Grandma will take you to sleep outside instead of staying here, okay? Mrs. Li asked the good news softly. Jiyan grinned and rubbed old Mrs. Li's face with a smile. Fu Niuer is so good. Mrs. Li finally showed a faint smile, turned around and led her family out of the yard. At the entrance of the village, there was a century-old tree with lush branches that could not be contained even if several people hugged it. The Li family lit a fire there and settled down temporarily. Fortunately, it is still late summer and the nights are not too cold. But everyone was worried and confused, and they rushed all the way here. Who knew what the result would be? End of this chapter. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 18. Chapter 18, Take Root and Survive. Let's all have a good rest. Let's take a look around tomorrow. It's best to find a place to stay no matter how bad it is here. It's still much better than outside the Great Wall. At least we don't have to worry about being beheaded by barbarians when we sleep at night. Orange Mrs. Li used a rattle to coax her granddaughter and spoke a few words of comfort to her children and grandchildren. Li Lauer and others felt sad after hearing this. They didn't want to make my mother sad and worry about them, so they quickly expressed their determination. Mom is right, our family can live better together than outside the Great Wall. That's right, Escort Lu asked me to go to the escort agency with an extra salary. My family will definitely be better off. Mrs. Li listened quietly, patted her granddaughter gently, turned her back to everyone, and then her tears fell gently, wetting Jiyan's swaddling clothes. Early the next morning, the Li family didn't cook either. The second brother Li and his two brothers were looking around, so Mrs. Li took Jiyan in her arms and went to find someone to inquire about the news. There was a woman's clothes hanging out in the yard, and the chimney was starting to smoke early, so she knocked on the door. The person who opened the door was a woman, about 30 years old. Seeing that Mrs. Li was getting older and holding a baby in her arms, she said in a very gentle tone, "Sister-in-law, what can I do for you?" Old Mrs. Li felt relieved when she saw how easy it was to get along with the woman, and then she said with a smile, "Sister, my granddaughter and I were passing by your village. We were thirsty and wanted to ask for some water." Hearing this, the woman hurriedly said hey, turned back to the house, scooped out water in a bowl, and brought it to Mrs. Li. Mrs. Li coaxed Good News to take a few sips. The woman kept staring at Good News, her eyes full of love. Jiyan saw that the woman liked children, so he did not hesitate to smile. He stuck out his tongue at the woman and shook his head, making the woman laugh all the time. "Sister, let me ask you, is there any place for people to live in this village? Our family came all the way to live with relatives, but the relatives were gone and we couldn't go back. We were thinking of finding a place to stay nearby." Old Mrs. Li returned the bowl to the woman and asked casually. When the woman heard this, She felt sorry for Mrs. Lee, and the good news was so lovely. She didn't hide it either. She took old Mrs. Lee and sat on the stone pillar at the door. She talked like a normal person and told old Mrs. Lee everything she knew. It turns out that this village was originally named Qingshui Village. The village is surrounded by mountains and rivers, and it was once a prosperous place. But there was a war many years ago. People in the village fled and died, and there were only a few families left. Later, when the imperial court stabilized, many soldiers who were injured in the war were assigned to settle here. As usual, the imperial court distributed some copper coins every month as compensation, and ignored the rest. Most of the wounded soldiers had no children. After they passed away one after another, the population of the village only decreased but did not increase, making it more and more deserted. What's even worse is that there was a locust plague here the year before last, and there was a flood last year, and many people died. Some people in the nearby villages spread gossip, saying that Qingshui village was cursed. It is said that those wounded soldiers brought with them the evil spirit of the battlefield, causing Qingshui village to suffer as well. In this case, no one will come this way. Hence, many empty yards and fields in the village lost their owners and were taken back by the county government. The woman was a little thirsty as she spoke, but she was also warm-hearted and gave Mrs. Lee some advice. "Old sister, it's not difficult for you to settle down. The first house in Nantu with a willow tree at the door is the village chief's house. Go tell him and he will definitely be able to help you." Mrs. Lee quickly thanked her, and when she was about to leave, she saw the woman looking at the good news eagerly, so she approached the woman holding the good news in her arms. "Nayuniu, please thank this aunt." Mrs. Lee teased the good news. Jiyan cooperated very well. He looked at the woman with big eyes, smiled so much that his 2 rows of bald gums were exposed, and reached out to touch her face. The woman's nose became sour and her eyes instantly turned red, but she still had a smile on her face. "This doll is so beautiful. If my girl were alive, she would definitely look like this too. This is also a miserable person." Old Mrs. Lee sighed inwardly, chatted for a few more words and then went back. Along the way, both grandfather and grandson were thinking about it. Although the woman just mentioned a lot about the bad past of Qingshui village, if you think about it carefully, this place is the most suitable for the Lee family. Most of the residents are wounded soldiers, and the folk customs are tough, but there are also fewer neighborhood calculations. Moreover, it is surrounded by mountains and rivers, has fertile soil, and is close to the county seat. It is only 200 miles away from Kyoto, and it only takes half a month to go back and forth. As for the curses rumored by others, Jiyan's mouth is watering with laughter. With her little lucky star here, do you need to be afraid of any curse? Hearing her granddaughter giggle, Mrs. Lee couldn't help but move up to kiss her little face and asked, "Do you like Funiur here?" Jiyan immediately clapped her little hands twice. "Aha!" Mrs. Lee didn't expect her granddaughter to respond. She was stunned for a moment, then started laughing. "Okay, just listen to our Funiur." After returning to the big tree, old Mrs. Lee called her sons to discuss the matter, and then old Mrs. Lee took Mr. Lee directly to the village chief's house. As expected, the village chief had a fierce look on his face, as if he had been on the battlefield, but he spoke very kindly. He was very happy to hear that the Lee family had 3 rooms in total, and that Lee Lauer could write and do math, and agreed to settle down with the Lee family without saying a word. Old Mrs. Lee gave him a piece of broken silver, which he accepted after hesitating, and then took them to wander around the village. After looking at several vacant yards, Mrs. Lee was not satisfied. Until we reached the northeastern side of the village, there was a large courtyard built against the foot of the mountain. This courtyard has 5 main rooms, 3 left and right side rooms, and 2 small side rooms, with a cooking stove and everything. There is a vegetable garden behind the yard, and a pig pen, chicken rack and toilet are built on the side. It is obvious that a lot of thought was put into the construction. The most important thing is that there are 10 acres of land behind the yard. It has been cultivated for more than 10 years. It is good and fertile land. However, it seems that it has not been planted in the past 2 years and has been much abandoned. This yard is really good, village chief. We will buy this yard. It would be better if we can buy the fields behind it together. Mrs. Lee immediately made the decision and decided. The villager didn't know what he thought of, and was a little stunned. When he came back to his senses, he looked carefully at the Lee family again, and then nodded. Okay, this yard and field belong to an old brother of mine. He had no children and passed away long ago. The house deeds and land deeds are all with me. Now I make the decision and I will sell them to you for 100 taels. The money will be kept, just every year. Prepare some sacrifices for him. Hearing this, Mrs. Lee hurriedly said. When we settle down, the village chief will help show us the way, and we will also go and pay our respects. The village chief's face became even brighter when he heard this. Let's go then. Whose name is the yard and the fields in? I'll take you to the county government office to settle down and hand over the house and land deeds. Mrs. Lee left her family to clean up the yard. She took Mr. Lee and the banknotes into the county town with the village chief. The transfer and settlement went smoothly, but within an hour, 2 thin deed papers were placed in Mrs. Lee's hands. Such a large yard and 10 acres of land only cost 100 taels. This price is absolutely unavailable, let alone a place so close to Kyoto, even outside the Great Wall. Old Mrs. Lee became more and more satisfied the more she thought about it, and finally smiled. At this point, the Lee family will take root again in Qingshui village to survive. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 19. Chapter 19. Our two families are no longer related. The village chief bought a roasted chicken and a jar of strong liquor. They returned to the village and went up the mountain together. I don't know if he wanted to report to his deceased brother. The Lee family, young and old, were all happy when they saw the deed. Everyone came up to have a look and touch, and then they became more and more enthusiastic about cleaning their new home. In the main room lived Mrs. Lee and Jiyan, and in the west room lived the Jiaran brothers. Then the south room in the east wing was given to Li Lao Er and his wife, and the north house was given to Li Lao San. The south room of the west wing was given to Li Lao Si and Tao Hongying, while the north room was locked and temporarily used as a warehouse. The two wing rooms are just for men and women to use as washrooms, and can also be used to dry underwear and the like. To avoid any embarrassment if so many people live together. The winter here in Kyoto is not considered warm, so every house has a heated kong, which makes the Lee family even more satisfied. Li Laoer followed behind my mother and was busy making a list. Kong mats, new window paper, oil, salt, soy and vinegar, rice, flour, grain and oil, pottery pots and jars are all needed. Mrs. Lee received the good news and gave the money to Tao Hongying and Li Yuru. Li Laosi and Ji Yi followed and hurried into the city to buy. Good news can't help, so try not to cause trouble. I pee a few times when I'm hungry, and when I'm really bored, I go to bed. Such a well-behaved person made Mrs. Lee and her family members even more happy. Anyone who came over would kiss her little face. The Lee family is so busy and making a lot of noise, so naturally people in the village heard about it. 3 women came back from the fields and gathered at the entrance of the village to chat. I heard from the village chief's wife that someone else has moved into the big yard at the foot of the mountain. One of the women lived next door to the village chief's house and quickly shared her newfound conversational skills with the others. Has that yard been bought? How much money did it cost? How brave. Don't they know how John Lokui died? Someone exclaimed. I heard it was 100 taels, and the family paid the silver without blinking an eye. The woman seemed to be watching Mrs. Lee hand over the money at the scene, gesticulating excitedly. This family is really rich. Although the yard is a bit dirty, it is really a good yard. I heard that John Lokui spent more than 100 taels when he built it. Now it only costs 100 taels to add 10 acres of land. They knew it's a real advantage to come here. Who says it's not the case? The village chief said that the family came to our village yesterday to seek refuge with relatives. The relatives refused to take them in, so they had to buy a place to live. I don't know which large family was deceived, and they were able to take such a rich person. Relatives turned away. Lu Taizu's wife, who was standing not far away, turned green and red after hearing this, and her intestines turned green with regret. She turned around and ran towards the yard at the foot of the mountain. The Li family was busy inside, and the bluestone floor was washed with water to make it look fresh. Lu Taizu's wife looked at it for a long time. She was in a daze and didn't even know how she got home. Ms. Guo was setting the fire to cook and was about to scold her daughter-in-law for being lazy, when she heard that the Li family had bought a yard for 100 taels. She jumped up from her chair immediately. Impossible, when did the Li family become so rich? Had they known this was the case, they should have imprisoned the Li family yesterday. Even if they wanted to drive them away, they would have to defraud the money out of them. Go and have a look over there. Mrs. Guo was unwilling to do anything about it. Mrs. Li was the children's aunt. Now that she was prosperous, how could she let her nephew suffer? She has to take the money from Mrs. Li. Lu Taizu and Lu Lefu also had this intention, and the whole family rushed to the foot of the mountain. Oh, eldest sister, you said it was true of you. You didn't even say a word to us when you left. I specially asked my daughter-in-law to cook for you this morning, but as soon as I opened the door, you were nowhere to be seen. As soon as she entered the courtyard, Ms. Guo approached Mrs. Li, her attitude many times more enthusiastic than yesterday. Old Mrs. Li raised her eyelids and glanced at her, and responded coldly, "Aren't you afraid that we will stay at your house?" Guo was embarrassed, but still defended shamelessly. Eldest sister has misunderstood, and you have also seen it. Our family is poor and only has a few houses. Aren't we afraid that eldest sister will dislike it? After finishing speaking, she looked at the big yard greedily and asked, "Sister, I heard that you bought this yard?" "Oh, it's a mess here. Everything needs to be cleaned up now. I'll ask Zuzu and the others to help." Lu Taizu and others pretended to roll up their sleeves to help, but in fact their eyes were fixed on the Li family's luggage bags. Just as Li Laosi and Tao Hongying came back from outside, they all looked bad when they saw the Lu family there. Li Laosi even chased people away directly. "We don't need your help, you should leave quickly." Lu Lefu already disliked Li Laosi, but upon hearing his words, jealousy and unwillingness surged up in his heart like fire. "You just bought a yard, what are you proud of? Let me tell you, our family has lived in this village for more than 10 years. If you dare to offend our family, you will definitely not be able to live in this village." Ji Yin had just been picked up by Tao Hongying and was sleeping in a daze. Hearing the Lu family's clamor again makes them even more tired. It was rare for her to burst into tears. This was like a hornet's nest. The Li family threw away what they were doing and rushed over. "What's wrong with Fu Niuer? Are you scared?" "I must have been frightened. I heard a dog barking just after I woke up." Old Mrs. Li was also very distressed. She was still a little soft-hearted towards the Lu family, but she immediately disappeared without a trace. She hugged her granddaughter and coaxed her, while pointing to the door to chase people away. "Leave quickly and don't come back again. As we said last night, Lu Jenner died and our two families are no longer related. Damn old woman, who do you dare to chase away?" Lu Lefu had a bad temper and raised his hand to hit Mrs. Li, but Mrs. Lee pinched her arm. Lu Lefu screamed in pain, and a layer of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Ms. Guo wanted to step forward to help her son, but was so frightened by Li Laoxi's look that she did not dare to move. Lu Lefu was so painful that he almost fainted. He felt as if his arm was broken, and then Li Laoxi suddenly threw him away. "Get out, don't let me see you again." The Lu family members hurriedly stepped forward to help Lu Lefu and stumbled out. Jiyan was very relieved and spat at their backs. Unfortunately, she didn't have much strength, and the saliva flowed from the corner of her mouth and fell into her neck instead. Just in time, Mrs. Lee and Mr. Lee saw this scene, and they burst out laughing. "Oh, my Fu Niuer is so awesome, she even spits on her." Even though Fu Niuer is young, she can still tell the difference between good and bad. Everyone was laughing and teasing Jiyan one after another, making Jiyan blush. Old Mrs. Lee waved her hand and gave instructions to her children and grandchildren. "Our family has settled down, and there may be good and bad things in the future, but we must be ambitious and work together to live a good life." The Lee family members responded in unison, "Don't worry, Mom, we will work hard. Grandma, let's be obedient too." At sunset, the new home was finally ready for habitation. Tao Hongying cooked a large pot of porridge, added wild vegetables, and tore up a roast chicken bought in the city. The first meal of her new home was ready. The family sat together, ignoring the disgusting looks of Wu Kuiwa and Wu Ergu frantically grabbing the roast chicken, and they all felt very comfortable. "After running around for nearly 2 months, I finally found a home." Seeing that autumn was about to come, the Li family had no time to express their emotions, so they got up early the next morning and started to continue their work. End of this chapter. Dressed as a farm boy, he cheated on his way out of the desert. Author, Delayed Flowering. Chapter 20. Chapter 20, Rabbits Committing Collective Suicide. It is definitely too late to grow food in the 10 acres of land behind the yard. But it would be good to plant some cabbage, radish, and the like and keep them for home use in the winter. Li Laoer and his 2 brothers went into battle together with hoes and cleared an acre of land in one day. Jiaran took his younger brothers up the mountain to cut firewood and drag it home to stack it. This was the key to keeping the family warm through the winter. Only Wu Kuiwa would hide and be lazy from time to time, but when it was time to eat, she was more active than anyone else. Although Zhao Yuru and Tao Hongying are diligent, they can still do their work neatly without Wu Kuiwa's help. But Mrs. Lee looked down upon this sneaky person and planned to properly discipline her second daughter-in-law after she was settled thoroughly. During the day, while Jiarenji was chopping firewood, he dug a lot of wild vegetables on the back mountain. Knocked the soil off the roots, arranged them neatly on a dustpan, and placed them in the sunniest place to dry. In winter, it is also a good dish to soak in water, blanch in hot water and dip into sauce. On this day, Li Lao took a pheasant that Li Lao Si had shot in the mountains yesterday and went to the village chief's house to borrow a donkey cart. "I plan to go to the county to buy more food for the winter." The village chief set up the donkey cart for Li Laoer, but he refused to take the pheasant. Li Laoer insisted on giving it and said with a smile, "Uncle, this is a little thought from our family. You can keep it and eat it." After saying that, he took the donkey cart to the town to buy food. This time, Mrs. Lee gave him 5 taels of silver, enough to buy several hundred kilograms of sorghum noodles. When the time comes, add some thin noodles, steam the buns or make pancakes to make you very hungry. Jiyan is currently lying on the kong, playing with the rattle, practicing hard to let her little hands follow the instructions of her brain. Old Mrs. Lee directed a few young men to clean up the warehouse, wash the pottery jars, and then put food in to avoid the harm of rats. Jiyan looked at the roof, thinking about going hunting in the back mountains with her father tomorrow. There are dozens more eggs stored in the space, and hundreds of kilograms of sweet potatoes have been dug up, and I will take them out every chance I get. She is still too young now and has to rely on others for simple things, which is really inconvenient. She is eager to grow up quickly. The little chubby arms like lotus roots swayed more and more happily, and the rattles also made a clanging sound. Oh, are we, Fu Niu, so happy today? Old Mrs. Li liked her granddaughter's cheerful appearance the most and quickly held her in her arms. Jiyan responded with two babbling sounds and began the daily necessary time for grandparents and grandchildren to cultivate their relationship. Jiaran and the others came closer and secretly touched the little sister's hands and feet, also laughing happily. Early the next morning, Li Laozi had breakfast, put on his bow and arrows, and prepared to continue hunting in the back mountains. Hunt more pheasants, stew some chicken soup for Tao Hongying, replenish her body and save more milk, so she doesn't have to worry about her daughter going hungry. Jiyan was drinking milk when she heard the voices of Mr. Li and Mrs. Li talking. She hurriedly raised her head from Tao Hongying's chest and said ah twice at Li Laozi's back. Lao Si, Fu Niu is calling you. Old Mrs. Li usually takes her granddaughter carefully, and she knows her best. Seeing this, she tried to shout, and sure enough, she waved her hands excitedly. As soon as Li Laozi turned around, he saw his daughter stretching out her little hands to hug her. He was so flattered that he quickly picked up his daughter from his wife's arms. His arms were stiff and he did not dare to use any force. Tao Hongying laughed, stood up and taught Li Laozi, "You hug me like this." Li Laozi adjusted his posture, teased his daughter for a while, and put her back into Tao Hongying's arms with a look of reluctance. "I will definitely find some wild eggs for my daughter today. Can such a big child eat custard?" As he spoke, he turned around and was about to leave, but Jiyan screamed again and reached out for a hug. Seeing that Li Laozi ignored her, she burst into tears at the top of her lungs. Li Laozi and Tao Hongying were both panicked and quickly checked to see if their daughter had peed. Jiyan took advantage of it and tugged on Mr. Li's sleeve. Mrs. Li thought about it, then nodded her granddaughter's forehead and asked, "Fu Niu, are you reluctant to leave your father?" Jiyan only responded. Mrs. Li blinked her eyes twice and asked again, "Then you want to go up the mountain with daddy?" This time the good news was not only echoed twice, but also danced happily. "If there is anything you don't understand," Mrs. Li decisively gave instructions to her son and daughter-in-law. "Put Fu Niu on your back, and you can go together." "No, mother, what if we encounter black bears and wild wolves on the mountain, and there are a lot of mosquitoes?" Li Laozi was the first to object, and Tao Hongying was also hesitant. Old Mrs. Li waved her hand. "Didn't Mrs. Sun give you a piece of fine yarn? Just wrap it around Fu Niu. My granddaughter said she wanted to go up the mountain, so I don't want to let the child down." Li Laozi and Tao Hongying were both dumbfounded. After all, the daughter just made a few noises. Everything was guessed by the old lady, and she was afraid that she could not take it seriously. But they still had no choice but to obey and get busy quickly. Zhao Yuru helped find fine yarn, while Wu Kuiwa secretly curled her lips and felt very unhappy, but did not dare to say anything. The hills behind Qingshui village are densely wooded, but because of this, there are many wild animals, but they are all very clever. If there is any movement, they will rush into the low bushes and disappear without a trace. Li Laozi, an expert archer who always hits the mark with perfect accuracy, rarely misses. Seeing that the sun was almost directly overhead, Tao Hongying found an open space and sat down to rest while holding the good news. Jiyan's dark eyes rolled around, and when Tao Hongying wasn't paying attention, he threw two stunned rabbits from the space. They were raised in the small yard of her space. When she first returned to the village, her neighbor gave her a pair of rabbits as a gift to kill some boring time. It turned out that these rabbits were so fertile that they were almost overrun in a few months. Take advantage of today to reduce the burden on the space courtyard. Tao Hongying turned around and saw two rabbits under the tree. She was startled and shouted hurriedly. Lao Si, come quickly. Li Lao Si, who heard the call, thought something had happened and ran back. Seeing the plump big gray rabbit, Li Lao Si was also surprised. Maybe it's because the weather is hot and the rabbit ran away. Ji Yan chuckled, Dad really made a good excuse. Such a big rabbit is enough for a family to eat 2 or 3 meals. Li Lao Si happily put the rabbit into his backpack. The couple were not tired anymore and continued to wander around the area. As a result, they picked up 7 or 8 stunned rabbits and even 2 nests of eggs, totaling more than 30 eggs. When he finally went down the mountain, Li Lao Si's backpack was full, and he was also carrying a pheasant with colorful tail feathers in his hand. Not only that, Tao Hongying also found a large piece of red mushroom in a patch of grass. This mushroom was very tender whether it was stewed in soup or fried, which made her very happy. The family of 3 returned home with a full load and unloaded their things in the yard. Even Mrs. Li was shocked. You got this in the back mountain? Mrs. Li looked at the mushrooms, pheasants and hares with a look of disbelief. Li Laosi nodded. Seeing that no one in the family had come, he secretly whispered in Mrs. Li's ear. Mom, the rabbit that I couldn't catch yesterday hit the tree by myself today. These were all killed by the collision and we picked them up. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Li subconsciously looked at the good news. End of this chapter.